What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, a podcast that interviews creators about where they came from to see how they got here. My name's Phil, and I'm with my partner in crime.
It's Ben Thorpe.
And today, we're interviewing Steve Pardo, the composer of this great little indie game by Echo Dogs Games called Signs of the Sojourner.
Yeah, it was a really good conversation. I think he got into the idea of music really adding a layer to games and being able to use music to understand the history of a place and to help kind of, I guess, tease out the emotional through line of the narrative of a game.
Yeah, it was interesting talking to Steve. Because I think one of the things I loved about Signs was the music. It was kind of the one thing that really, if I had to choose one thing that really stuck with me after I finished the game, it was that. And I guess to kind of circle back, Signs of the Sojourner, it's a game, like a road trip game. You play as a character who's from a small town, and your mother has passed away, and she kind of ran the general store of this town called Bartow, where you're from, and you've never left before. And more or less, the game kind of takes your protagonist on this caravan across all these different towns with all their different kinds of cultures and ideologies and things like that. And it packages all of that within this deck building card, almost like card battler game where the game is conversation itself.
Right. And it's like the different cards that you have will vary based on the locations you're going to. And so you'll have some pretty basic shapes to start out with. Like when you're in your starting small town, it's like a circle and a triangle, I think, or it's just like a series of triangles. And so those conversations with your kind of close friends and with your family are really easy to start that game off with. But each location you go to, you have to start switching out your cards. And so as you go, it's making it harder and harder to kind of have easy conversations where everybody kind of has the same basic framework of cards to work with. And so you start, I think, basically failing conversations all the time. And it feels kind of uncomfortable. It's kind of a bummer. You'll be having conversations with people and they get frustrated because they're like, oh, you don't understand what I'm saying. You don't understand what I'm trying to say to you. And so you'll just start kind of failing a series of conversations. And I think, Phil, we should say you wrote a piece about this. But one of the things that stands out about it that you kind of highlight is that as you come home, you then have a completely different kind of deck of conversation cards. And the conversations with your hometown and your friends are now also much, much harder. And it kind of punches you in the gut.
Yeah, I think, Ben and I have lived a bunch of different places over our lives. And a theme or idea that oftentimes comes up between us is this idea of going back home, seeing people that we used to know or that we don't talk to as much anymore, and kind of the struggles of finding those connection points and those points of relation. And sometimes it's really easy to kind of fall back into those personas that we once had, and sometimes it's harder. And I think that this game does a really good job of emulating that idea with human connection and conversation through this really fun and vibrant, not only gameplay mechanic with the cards, but also the world itself. The art direction is really fun and colorful and kind of watercolored. And it's incredibly diverse. That was another thing about the game that right off the bat, I was really pleased by. It was just a very diverse cast of characters from all different types of walks of life. And it was able to comment on all types of, social issues, in a really unique and interesting way. And I think something that Steve gets into in our interview is this idea of mixing the familiar with the alien in the music. And I think that also permeates the story and the gameplay of finding these kind of things that you can relate to and then kind of spinning them or morphing them a bit. So Yeah, really excited to talk about this game and for you all to hear about Steve's process, not only in making the music for this game, but kind of this great trajectory that he had for his career, starting way back at Harmonix, where he was working on things like Rock Band, to starting his own music studio where he's producing games with his friends, or producing music with his friends, basically. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned it at the top. I think one of the things that I've realized, kind of post playing the game, and obviously we listened to the album of this game several times in the kind of prep for this interview, is just like how much of the atmosphere of the game I think I've realized is from his design and his music design and the way he was thinking about, what a piece of music might say about a place. And we kept coming back to this idea about a series of like home themes or town themes that he created for this game. So yeah, it's a really cool interview.
well, let's not keep them waiting.
Let's get in there.
You're about to hear our interview with Steve Pardo on Signs of the Sojourner.
Roll the clip.
Steve Pardo is a composer and interactive audio designer in the video game industry. He's the co-founder of audio production house SkewSound, a game developer at the Pardo Brothers, and an audio director at Authentic Artists. Pardo has a background in jazz, and his professional career began at legendary music game studio Harmonix Music Systems, where he led the audio team for games such as Rock Band VR, Dance Central, and Super Beat Sports. In addition to collaborating on some of the world's most recognizable music gaming titles, he's also composed a range of other interactive soundtracks such as Signs of the Sojourner, Gigantic, Grim Dawn, and Fantasia Music Evolved. Outside of games, he's scored music for networks such as Netflix, Adult Swim, and IFC. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Pleasure being here.
So we were really inspired to talk to you today just about Signs of the Sojourner, and then from there, kind of jump into your career. You have a vast background, it seems, and we'll get into all that. So how about we start with Signs, and I think to start us off, what kind of drew you to the project? What were your kind of initial, what was like your initial relationship to the project and how you got into it?
Sure. Well, yeah, thanks again for inviting me on the show. It's a pleasure getting to talk to you guys and about my background and this game in particular. But the Sojourner project, Signs of the Sojourner, with Echo Dog Games, was they reached out to us. So when I say us, I'm talking about SkewSound, the company that I co-founded with some good friends of mine from the Harmonix days. Usually when we are connected to a team, it's either because one of us has had a previous relationship or a previous professional, we work together on either in a game context or a film context or music context, or we're just friends and, working on something collaborative together. But in this case, we did not have any sort of connection to the Echo Dog folk. They approached us simply because they heard our work. They did their research and listened to the music that I've written and some of the sounds we've done on previous games. So it was kind of a unique, starting off point where we were trying to get to know them and they were trying to get to know us. But for me especially, I saw when they approached us, they shared the website and materials, and I immediately fell in love with the project. And so even though I was sort of not really knowing, much about who they were or what the team was all about, I was like, I have to work on this game. I have to make music for this world. I'm creatively, this is feeding me. I'm inspired. So, at that point it was like, I was trying to prove to them that I should be the one to compose music, so it was like that kind of like really healthy, the collaborative nature there was already, kind of coming together even before we got signed. So it went pretty quickly because Diala, the lead designer there, shared some material with me just so I can, and this is something I do with every project that I get signed on to, is that I'll ask for references and we'll kind of get to know their musical tastes. Because I feel like that's really important. Like if they have an idea of what the music should sound like, great, and they'll share their references for the world and for the characters. But if they don't have that, which was the case here, just like, hey, what music do you like? What are you listening to on the weekends or while you're cooking dinner? What aren't you listening to? What should this absolutely not sound like? And so just getting that information, so that I know what to, where to start or making sure not to go. Like if you're not into metal, I won't write you anything that has shredding guitars, or, if you hate country music, I won't use pedal steel or fiddle violin. But in this case, like, we met eye to eye with the kind of music that both they liked and were seeing for this game. Small groups, both from jazz, from indie rock, folk, country, and a little bit of classical music. They shared with me some music from Darren Korb, one of the most well-known game composers out there. He did the soundtracks for Bastion, more recently Hades, super well-known composer, and who I love his music to death. So that, as being a reference, was inspiring as well. Andrew Bird was an inspiration. I brought some of my own inspirations, like Bill Frisell, Omu Sangare, who is she's from Mali, one of the most just charismatic and well-known African singers, and so bringing that like culturally into this game, I thought was would be really cool. But and there were a few other inspirations that I threw at them, kind of like seeing if we were on the same page, and it was like the most easy thing to do, the most like kind of just like flowing creative back and forth. It's so much so that by the end of that conversation, I honestly was like, oh, they're asking me to make an album of music that I would have wanted to make anyway. Basically, like, they just want me to make music and not try to like make it for a product outside of something that I already kind of like enjoy, that I would want to make something on my own free time. So it was like a dream project, to be perfectly honest, and I still feel that way. Like, I got to work on my dream project, making this album, seemingly for myself, but also for this game that has a creative vision that I wholeheartedly believe in.
I want to jump in there because I think you're almost getting at one of the things that we were talking about, which is it seems like it's a game that has these really rich themes around kind of communication and the idea of kind of hometown and how leaving your home can make it harder to communicate with the people from that hometown once you get back. And so I'm wondering kind of how something that is kind of so thematically rich, do they tell you or do they give you a sense of here's what we're here's what's part of our creative vision, and will you write to that? And how do you, I guess, interweave those themes into the music that you're writing?
That's a great question. There was at first, them. Okay, you guys know this. It's a really unique game. There's not very many games that are. I mean, it's a card game. It's a narrative game. It's an RPG light kind of thing. It has missions, but it's also none of those things. It's telling a narrative or conveying a truth about human nature through this card game, right? That you're playing, and it changes as the narrative goes, and as you venture out into the unknown, and then even as you come back home, like the card game itself is communication, but it's all subtle. It's like the most beautiful kind of art. So us figuring that out took a long time. That's like me even just saying that over the microphone to you guys is like, I'm not fully even conveying what that means, right? It's kind of an intangible thing. And no article that I've read, by the way, is actually like nailing this concept. It's all very subtle, right? So, but as a content creator, I'm making music for this product. I kept asking them questions over and over again, like, okay, so is it important that we have interactive music for this narrative beat, or whenever this card is played, should we like do something with the music? And for a while, we actually were pitching that, like, hey, we can score every time there's a new character, and every time they go or there's a new act in the sequence of events, or once this thing happens, we can change the music dramatically. And we actually pitched that and put it in the game a few times, but it didn't really need to be there. And if anything, it took away from the experience as a whole, because the game itself is doing so much of the heavy lifting in that regards, that like just letting the player kind of be immersed in that gameplay, it was enough to like for that message to get through, in our opinion. And so therefore the music, just all it needed to do was be background music, and kind of tell the story of the location that you're in and the characters that you're interacting with. But that took a long time for us to get there. So, what's great though is that initially I was inspired by the art. I was inspired by the simplicity of the game, and just immediately, just like I was attracted to that, so I just started writing music. And so while we were sort of figuring out the interactive system, I was still actually doing the work of writing the town theme, because every town kind of has its own theme, right? It's basically just an album of town themes, or a soundtrack of town themes. So I just did that. I just wrote all these town themes, and they got into the game. And then by that time, I had sort of understood this gameplay is intense, and the interactivity of the music doesn't need to be as evolving as I thought it had been. There are still certainly interactive elements to the soundtrack, but for the most part, it's just kind of background music. It's essentially just town themes, and I feel great about that.
Yeah, just to bounce off that, this idea of an album of town themes, like something that I love when I'm listening to like game soundtracks or playing a game is like those home themes, or like going to a new town and hearing that kind of sound as a way to communicate what the place is like. And I'm, as somebody who isn't a musician, I'm just so fascinated by how you even kind of conceptualize like the sound of a place, right? Because it's not something that's like natural, like in our real world, right? And I'm curious for this game, thinking about those town themes, like what was that process like? Was it like they gave you some kind of brief that's like Barto is X, Y, and Z, or was it kind of more flexible?
It was kind of a little bit of both. So they gave me a story brief, and which laid out every single location, all of the characters in each location, and a little bit of backstory into how that town came to be and the conflict it might be going through, and its relationship to the player, the main character in the game. So I had a starting place just through that one document, right? And I could say, okay, so Anka is like a thriving rich city with a huge, thriving metropolis and economy. And it has a little bit of culture in this way and that way, and there's this character here. So I can write something that feels very rhythmic, very almost like a big band jazz kind of aesthetic, or like I was thinking very Gershwin, like kind of up tempo and rambunctious, but in my own sensibility, obviously. It still is a small group, and but it's just very kind of loud and lots of drums. And similarly, like Barto is your hometown and should feel very comfortable to the player because it's where they grew up and it's where your mother had her shop and your best friend is there. But as far as like musically, there was nothing, right? So I was continually, whenever I started a new track, asking questions to the developers. So like, what is the, is there any conflict that the player would themselves have to be engaging with here? Is there any sadness about this location? I see that it's kind of desolate. It's out in the corner of the world map. Is there any technology that's unique to this area? Is there? I see there's this main character here in this, and in this world, there's this main character who you're mainly focusing with. What's their story? Like, what's their role in the town? Trying to get as much information as I could about that, because seeing it as a whole, and this is something that we came up with kind of relatively early on before I started like sketching every song. Well, actually, sorry, let me go back just a little bit. Sure. At the very beginning of the game, we were trying to figure out, and I scored this trailer. That was like the very first piece of music that I put out there that ended up becoming the main theme of the game. But I used that trailer trying to figure out the core instrumentation of the game, which, as you guys probably know, is mostly just acoustic instruments. It's the stuff in my room, right? It's like this drum set, it's this guitar, it's all these woodwinds, because it's like my album, so it's just all these instruments that I own and play. But how synthetic versus how acoustic should this soundtrack be? And there was a little bit of tension. Like, one member of the team was like, I thought this was going to be an electronic music album, right? And so what I wrote was so acoustic based that it kind of threw them off. So there was a little bit of debate, and we came to the agreement that no, this world should feel, at least at the beginning, should feel very comfortable, feel very at home, with sounds that feel very recognizable. So we stuck with this acoustic kind of folkish palette, but then really liked the idea of bringing in unique synthetic instruments that very one-to-one with the narrative and with the technology being utilized at each given location. So as the player goes out, it starts to feel a little bit more alien, starts to feel a bit more technological, bringing in kind of more unique and less comfortable sounds, as you are literally going farther away from home and having to wrestle with, new cultures and new technology and more conflict.
Yeah, I think you're kind of touching on that to some degree. It's difficult to get at, the artistic vision that someone else has, and that it's a negotiation process to kind of figure out where is this thing going to land. And I'm wondering if you can talk about like what are some of the tracks that maybe were more difficult to get there, to get the kind of song where it needed to be.
One track in particular was very difficult, and actually took more revisions than pretty much anything else in the game. So with Old Marais, it's kind of this town where what used to be a thriving metropolis and is currently sort of desolate. It's either surrounded by water or immersed in water, or it's flooded. There's some story there where water is sort of consuming, but at the time when it was a thriving metropolis, it was a fishing town and thriving. But so when I was reading the story brief, and when I was talking with the developers, the mood that I kept getting was kind of like submerged, like you're underwater, like I kept feeling like that's where I wanted the player to be. So I kept writing all these dark, kind of like, muted, almost sad kind of tracks. And we went through a few of these revisions and they didn't really know how to pin it down as for what they were looking for. And so it kind of was a frustrating back and forth. I would throw in some synthetic elements. I would make it like darker and moodier. And then I just was like, oh, forget it. I'm just going to write this funk, thing. So I got out my Moog and I laid down a drum beat and I just kind of went with it. It's got this little like funky, happy little synth part in there. And I'm not even going to tell them why I did this. I'm just say, hey, how about this? They were very surprised, and I think the angle that I had sort of brought back in was, hey, this used to be a thriving metropolis. So it told part of the story of Old Moray that wasn't current, but signals to the player, hey, this place used to be really cool. A lot of culture used to be present here in this world. So, and I think that's. And also, for one other thing, no other track in this game sort of has that kind of backbeat, and so it's a little bit of a surprise for the player when they stumble across it, because it's a little bit kind of farther away in the game. That they, all of a sudden it's like they're dancing to this song. Finally, okay, fine, it's a funky dance track, cool.
It is funny that you say that Old Moray was one of the more difficult tracks, because boy, it is a very fun track. I think we both kind of singled it out as wow, this is just a great song.
Oh, cool. That's great. I'm glad to hear. Yeah, I mean, I still, when I hear it, think about all this. It was never supposed to be, this song was never supposed to make it on the soundtrack, but here it is, I think that music soundtracks underscore one of the things that they can do is bring out a sense of the narrative and the backstory of a given place or an environment that nothing else is currently doing, right? It's just another piece of that storytelling puzzle that we have access to. So
yeah, that friction, I'd almost call it, between the acoustic and the synthetic instrumentation, the way you articulate it really kind of elucidates my feeling when I was playing it, of this, the synthetic elements kind of made me feel like I was in this otherworldly or alien place, whereas the acoustic elements made me feel at home. And that I think that really, really worked. You really knocked it out of the park. And I guess maybe a question that I have then is, thinking about these town themes, thinking about home and whatnot, what did home sound like for you, or what does home sound like for you now?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's awesome. It's an awesome question. Because I think that it actually reflects exactly what I wrote for Bartow. And that's kind of freaking me out a little bit. So my wife is a flute player, and she practices the flute. And now she's a mother as well. And she practices the flute literally every day for hours at a time. So I hear she's the soundtrack to my life. She's not doing it right now, but she's usually playing downstairs in the living room or in our bedroom. Warm-ups, etudes, an orchestral excerpt. And I utilize her playing on just about every soundtrack that I'm working on. I'm a flute player as well, but her flute playing is miles better than mine. And so it feels like a little bit cheating that I have access to her for every single project. But for home, that is so interesting that you say that, because she's the sound of the basically representing the mother in the game. So whenever you hear her playing, it's because it's that reflection of like the mother. She doesn't. The mother in the game, you know, this isn't a spoiler because she passes away like in the tutorial. You sort of get the sense that she's passed away. So her like, you know, presence is kind of persists throughout the entire game, but is very clear at the very beginning of the game when she's actually there in the room. It's just like solo flute. And then any time that the mother is like being referenced, or if there's a character that has known your mother, you're hearing her play the flute. Actually, the character Nadine, who is another character that kind of persists throughout the entire game, didn't feel like she was really being treated correctly until we brought in alto flute to represent her character, because she has known the main character's mother and is a part of that your home story. But the soundtrack of Barto, as like a rooted the actual sonic palette is folk instruments, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, mandolin, ukulele, and these are instruments that we are in our home picking up and playing every day, right? I'm a guitar player as well, and one of the things, this is a little bit inside baseball for my life, but one of the things that my wife tells me over and over again is she knew she fell in love with me when I played Blackbird for her on the acoustic guitar, back when we were like freshmen in college, right? So home, I mean, my home is Barto in a way, so that's really fascinating that you mentioned that.
No, I think even to kind of continue down that route, like growing up, you know, obviously you play a lot of instruments now. Was music something that was like a big part of like your childhood? Like, were your parents playing music, or was it one of those situations where, you know, your parents forced you to play music and then you ended up loving it? Like, what was that like?
It was the best of both of those worlds, where I grew up in a musical family. My mom is a classical pianist. I heard her playing, she taught piano lessons out of our home, so I heard her playing every day. My dad is a bossa nova guitar player, singer, songwriter, and he also plays keyboards, but is very much so like a natural musician, right? So neither of them forced music on me by any means. They never, I mean, like when I was maybe 3 years old, they brought me to a music store and I saw a violin, and even then I was like, I want to play violin, and they were like, okay. I guess we'll sign you up for violin lessons. And then like a year later, I was like, I don't want to play violin anymore. And they were like, okay, fine. My mom never forced me to learn piano. She never taught me. Same with my dad, never forced it on me. So it was very like, just, I was surrounded by it in a positive way and chose it as my, hobby and then career, pretty early on. I just fell in love with the Beatles and jazz, and later like indie rock and classical music. So but that was all, none of it was forced on me. It was just this presence in my life that I felt like I had to be a part of it. Yeah.
Can you maybe talk about how you came to games and writing music for games? And would you kind of consider yourself a gamer, or are you someone who really it's the music side that brought you in?
I definitely grew up a gamer. I had an NES, I had an SNES, I had an N64, I had a Game Boy, I had a GameCube, I had an Xbox. So I was gaming throughout my entire childhood for sure. Koji Kondo, the composer for Mario and Zelda and others, is my hero to this day. And I got to meet Shigeru Miyamoto like 2 years ago, and it was one of the happiest days of my life by far. And I'm going to say that I do not consider myself a gamer anymore. Although I still make it a point to play one or two, kind of meaningful, creative, spirited types of titles that come out, game of the year kind of titles, just so, because I don't have much time anymore. I have kids, obviously, and I'm busy, and so, but I still feel like not only is it my it's sort of I'm by nature of my trade, it's required of me to stay current. So I owe it to myself to make sure that I'm playing the latest and greatest, but also I just enjoy it. And I'm playing the Pathless currently right now on PS5. And that's my speed. You know what I mean? Like Austin Wintory, the composer, is a hero of mine for sure. And like the speed of that game and the message that it's sending, it's non-violent, but it's also very lots of action and like you're on your toes and very, very thoughtful in that engagement. But then, I still have a Nintendo Switch and I play with my kids, and we, every weekend we'll spend like a couple hours playing Madden or that kind of thing. But yeah, so I try to choose the titles that I'm engaging with these days wisely and intentionally, and obviously with an ear towards like learning something, or how does this apply to my field.
Kind of going off of Ben's question, I feel like you were working at Harmonix during like around that time when they were just like really blowing up. Like Rock Band was big, Rock Band 3, Rock Band VR, and those kinds of things. I'm wondering, kind of, was that kind of like your first big foray in the games industry, or were you working at some other places before? Or?
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. I missed the back half of that earlier question. So, but yeah, so my first job out of school was stumbling into being a composer / sound designer on the audio team at Harmonix Music Systems. And the first game that I hopped into was the Beatles Rock Band, featuring the Beatles. So, and I was super interested in games and music, but never really put the two together, and that could be a career choice for myself. When I was in school at University of Miami, I just saw myself as a saxophone player. That's what I got my undergraduate in, jazz saxophone, and then later jazz writing. But that opportunity, or the way to get into the games industry, was never clear to me, and I never thought about it. I was like, no one actually has these jobs. No one actually can write music for video games. That's not a thing people do. And so when the opportunity kind of showed up, I couldn't say no. And thankfully we were at a point where we're just out of school, and we could be flexible, and we could move to Boston and make that happen. So yeah, we were thrown right into it. I had learned, so much that first year of working at Harmonix about the culture of making games, the technology, that they're, what it's like to work in a game engine, what it's like to work with artists and producers and game designers, the whole thing. Like, there wasn't a school, at least not to my knowledge, there wasn't a school of like game audio that could have prepared me for that. The only reason I got in at the time I did is because the music, I think they saw that I could produce quality audio through the music that I was making, and that I had chops with MIDI, which at that time was really important for Harmonix, because we were doing note charts, what we called authoring for Rock Band, all the Rock Band games. So I authored guitar parts, vocal parts, drum parts, keyboard parts later for Rock Band 3 as like the main bulk of my job. That's kind of how I got into the industry, is just from being able to transcribe guitar parts, right? I actually learned a lot of guitar working for Rock Band 3, because it actually, if you all know, it actually shipped with like a pro guitar, which is basically a real guitar game controller, which is insane. But I learned like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan tunes that way. So I actually got like reasonably decent at playing rock solos thanks to that.
I'm kind of wondering, was there a vision for you of like, because I think you're talking about it there, where it's like, is there a space for music in games or being a part of an industry that is designing music for games? You know, it sounds like you were almost kind of coming in as it was growing as a place where it's like, oh, I can get a job doing that. And so can you maybe talk about how you were thinking about that?
Well, I saw it as an opportunity to do what I really wanted to do, which was write music. You know, and whether that be for games or for TV or for myself, I didn't really care. If I could somehow find a way to make music as a job, that to me seemed like a luxury. So, you know, when I stumbled into it, I knew I had stumbled into it, and I felt very lucky. I still feel very, very lucky. And I whenever a young person asks me, how did you get into games? I'm like, sorry, kid, like, I don't know what to say. Yeah, I stumbled into games, right? Maybe go to game jams, you know, maybe go to GDC. That's what I'm saying nowadays, right? Because it still feels like I just, you know, struck gold a little bit. So, but like once I was in, I knew that, and I do not consider myself a sound designer as much as I do a composer, but this was a sound design gig. So I just cut making music, kind of being myself, making music, putting it out there, posting in our internal chat, like, hey, I put out this song. And then it was only like a year after that a coworker of mine, you know, who was making an indie game on the side, invited me to do the soundtrack for that game, which was outside of Harmonix. And that led me doing that one soundtrack, which was Grim Dawn, led me to forming SkewSound a few years later on, which is the game audio / music studio that we co-founded in 2014 and that I'm still working with today.
Yeah, do you feel like, you know, obviously games are incredibly popular now. You know, I think a lot of people say they're bigger than the film industry and things like that. Do you think because of that there has been kind of a clear path paved for somebody who wants to get into music and games? And the reason I ask is because I was telling Ben that like way back in 2012, I went and saw the Final Fantasy Distant Worlds concert in Chicago with my dad, who's at the time was like a mid-60s black man, never played a video game in his life, but loves classical music and opera and things like that. And it was kind of this great moment for him, that was a moment where he's like, oh, games music is actually like good. It's like this, you know, there's like skill involved. And after that, he like actually like listens to at least Final Fantasy music and stuff like that. And I'm curious, like, as public perception has changed about what games can be and, you know, what they are, do you think that path is becoming a little bit more open for somebody who like maybe is in school and wants to get in the industry?
Yeah, I'll answer that questions in a few different ways. I think that what's the most exciting about today's landscape with both, we'll speak mainly to games, and I know this exists for TV and film as well, but there's so much variation that like kind of no matter what type of musician, composer, producer that you are, you will be able to find titles that match your kind of output, your creative, who you are, or who you seek to be, right? Like, there's no stopping anybody that makes any kind of music from making a game soundtrack. The only gate is finding those titles where kind of it matches your creative will, right? Because I don't think, and I think this is a common misconception, that like a composer who is most excited about, let's say, rock, needs to learn, you know, classical harmony, counterpoint, orchestration. Like, no, that's not like necessary anymore. Like, there are plenty of ways to use your skills in rock production for games today. You know, look, I mean, Darren Korb is the perfect example, right? I mean, he's obviously branching out, but you know, he comes from that like studio production music sensibility as opposed to like the symphony, right? Or the classical tradition. So myself, I'm a jazz musician, right? Like I stumble into orchestration time from time to time, but it all comes back to jazz for me, no matter what I'm working on. Sojourner is very clearly inspired by multiple types of jazz. So you know, for a young composer, it's like sometimes there are these stresses that you feel like I need to live up to this level of this kind of music in order to get a job. And as long as your craft is high, no matter what kind of music you're making, you'll be able to find professional work. Absolutely. And the other thing I'm going to say to this question is that there's not just one track to work, and your interest today may not be your interest tomorrow. And to be seeking out ways to grow in ways that may or may not have anything to do with the music you're making. Like you for me, I found a lot of joy in this generative music thing thanks to Harmonix, because we were making weird music experiences where the player is changing the music depending on what they're doing or what's happening in the game. Now, that's also just a technique that every game composer, well, I won't say every, but most game composers are utilizing in their games. It's like the modern way to score for games is having a lot of interactivity, what we call adaptive music systems, right? So now I'm doing that like so much. It's almost most of my day is working on AI generative music systems to drive newly composed music just from hitting the play button, right? Like every time you hit play, it's a new song. So I love it, and that has that bit of improvisation and that bit of surprise that stems from jazz, which is like right here for me, and so I'm able to connect with it, right? And also I love technology. I've always been a nerd in that way, so getting into scripting and working in game engine is certainly a passion of mine that has grown since working in the game industry. So all that to say, like, and I mention all these things because the opportunities for a young composer or a sound designer are so much wider than they were when I got started in 2009. The games and just music tech has like started branching out into crazy different ways. Just not just from the music production tool sensibility, but just the applications of social media and virtual reality, virtual concerts, video games, obviously. Just like people are consuming media in new ways, and audio and music can react in new ways. And as long as you're willing to kind of be, into emerging technology, and if you're inspired by that, you can find new ways to be yourself still as a creator, to be yourself still as an artist, and get work. If that's now, again, like I'm saying that as if getting work is the ultimate means to an end. If you're an artist that just wants to make a cool indie game and you have an expression that you want to see out there, then you can make a video game on an indie scale that speaks almost like an album. A musician just releasing an album. Your game can be an album, and just say something creatively to a certain audience that you want to connect to.
And Steve, sorry for just a minute. What I think you said, AI generative music. What is that?
Let's back up when you said AI generative.
You said that, and I've been fixated on that for the rest of the way that you answering that question. I was like, I have what in God's name?
Okay, yeah. This is the most recent thing that's been made public. So just 2 days ago, the company that I'm audio directing for, the name of it is Authentic Artists, had a big press push, and now we're out there, and it's no longer a secret. I've been working with these folks for over a year now as audio director. It's the premise of it sounds scary, but it's actually not, and it's actually awesome. And so as I describe what it is, like, don't feel so guarded. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think it was cool and had virtue. So, and there's also a reason that it's called Authentic Artists. So the premise of it is virtual artists, non-human virtual artists that are just simply just CGI characters, cartoon characters, very similar to, like, you guys know Gorillaz, Little Michaela, or Hatsune Miku. This is sort of the kind of the lineage of virtual artists that are sort of already out there. But this is all way more about interactivity with the music that they're creating, and the concerts that they're putting on the audience has direct control over what they're hearing and can change the backstory, or not the backstory, sorry, can change the trajectory of the kinds of music that these virtual artists will create, as well as like culturally where they are going to be residing, right? Practically what that means is they are going to be on Twitch. They're going to be doing these virtual DJ shows. You can change the music that's currently playing using Twitch, key commands. And then like the commands at a certain, a frequency, like a song section or two, will get sent to our system. We'll update the music in real time, and will change according to the wills of the chat, the people that are engaging with the music in real time.
What kind of changes could you make?
Well, it's AI driven. So the world is your oyster. You can make it a completely new song. You can change the kind of drum beat that it's playing. You can make it do a bass drop. You can make it do a saxophone drop. You know what I mean? Like you can literally do whatever you want so we just need to like expose certain properties. Like, do we want to recompose something? Do we just want to do a sound swap? Do we want to change the tempo? Do we want to, you know what I mean? Like it's make it major go to minor, anything. So
I guess is the big picture vision that like on a place like Twitch you would have a kind of a digital persona artist that people would be like go listen to, and they would be creating tracks to kind of a very specific person watching?
Well, when we say you right now, it's just the community. So because we just got started, so the way it works right now is we have one instance of a show running at real time. So it's a show. So the audience is collectively teaming together and deciding, the path of the music. Yeah, but then like the future stuff is all TBD. It's sort of like, we want to prove out that, audiences are connecting. That's the most important thing, is that there's meaningful interaction between the audience and the artist, virtual artist, and for what it's worth, like there is, when I go back to the virtue question, like we're working with human artists for sure to make this sound as good as possible. Mike Shinoda of Linkin Park fame is one of our lead investors and is collaborating with us on the audio level. Decap, who's like a really well-known producer, known for his drum samples on Splice, among other things. Stolen Drums, Great Good Fine Okay, Chipsel, who's a game composer I've gotten to loop in. Oracle Blue, who's a local crew from Nashville. Lots of talent making this happen, and that's the spirit. It's a collaboration. It's a team effort. It's not just this robot in the sky. It's human beings collaborating, getting paid to make music of this kind of technological sensibility happen.
Interesting. That's I was listening to the Broken Record podcast with Mike Shinoda, and he does like a Twitch stream where he like composes music on the fly with user submitted clips. So this is almost like an evolution of that, with way more interactivity and algorithmic layering. And
yeah, I'm glad you know Mike's Twitch channel, because when we first were talking with him, immediately got what we were doing and was just freaking out a little bit. So the spirit of his Twitch channel is close, but he's definitely more in the studio working from nothing. Whereas what we have is very much so something that then the audience can immediately affect in an immediately meaningful way. So it's a lot quicker. But what Mike does is very slow. And what I love about Mike's Twitch channel is that you get a behind the scenes view into someone like his workflow and creative process. So obviously we're looking at that as being something that we can do as well. But for now, it's more so about the fast paced nature of it being a show, and kind of like hyper changes to the music in real time.
Unless there's is there something that we haven't asked that you want to touch on?
No, I hope that we touched on some things that y'all can play with.
It was great. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you guys for reaching out. This has been a blast for me. So, yeah, all the best, and hope we can do it again.
All right, catch you later.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode with Steve Pardo. He took a call kind of abruptly at the end, and eventually he did come back, but the goodbyes were just a little too awkward. That's not on Steve Pardo, that is on us, and so it kind of didn't quite fit. So we're just here to say, hey, thanks for listening, and this is our moment of kind of trying to wrap things up.
We promise we're not that awkward. But
I am. To be clear, I just want to be clear. Phil is not that awkward. I am.
But yeah, thanks Steve Pardo for coming on for the interview. You can find him on Twitter at Steve Pardo, or his website is stevepardo.com. Where can they find you, Ben?
They can find me at sad_radio_lad.
And you can find me on Twitter at 3D Cisco. And of course, you can find this podcast at originstory_. Thanks to Ryan Hopper for providing the music for our show. And thanks to Melody Hirsch for the awesome cover art. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, or if you just want to tell us what your favorite sandwich is, you can hit us up over Twitter, again, at originstory_, or on our Gmail, theoriginstorypod@gmail.com.
Also, if you liked this episode, actually, even if you hated it, pull it up on iTunes and leave a review. You don't have to say anything. Just give us the stars. That'll help people find the podcast. I think it'll even help it if you just want to drop a 1-star review. So go ahead, live your life.
And I hear that even if you hate it, if you do the 5-star, it actually counts as the same thing. So, just saying.
That's true. That's true.
So, without further ado, we will catch you all again here shortly with the next interview. Peace.
Bye.